We already know they've gone well beyond the scope of the original investigation, and that was Russia-Trump campaign collusion. And now we're on to obstruction, and now we're on to finances, and now we're on to God only knows where this thing ends. And we saw what happened with Patrick Fitzgerald. That started with Valerie Plame, who was not an operative, and ended up with, a perjury trap for Scooter Libby. And that's the problem with all of these special counsels. Joining us now, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. At one point, I think you had how many ethics charges against you, and they were all dropped?
Well, we had 83 against me, 82 were dropped, and the only one that had any substance was actually a letter my lawyers wrote, which was a mistake. So I owed it to my lawyers who had prepared the letter. But we actually defeated the Federal Election Commission, and we defeated the Internal Revenue Service, but it was a 5-year-long war in which the left, who were bitterly resentful that we had won control of the House for the first time in 40 years and decided that I was the problem. And so they went out of the way to try to destroy me by these kind of attacks, which is why I'm probably much more cautious than most Republicans in watching what I see developing. When I see a grand jury in a constituency in which Trump got 4.8% of the vote, that is, by 19-1, the constituency did not vote for him. I say to myself, now how likely is that grand jury going to be filled with people who are hostile to the president? When I consider then that grand jury could lead to a trial in the same jurisdiction, and I remember that in the case you mentioned, in terms of a total abuse of prosecutorial power, when objectively there's no question that Patrick Fitzgerald totally abused his power to go after Dick Cheney's chief of staff. Well, in the trial of that case, there were 11 Democrats and 1 Green Party member.
You see, it sounds to me like Mueller is now on a fishing expedition, and this was addressed this weekend. And what Rosenstein said was a couple of things that interested me. That Bob Mueller I understand the specific scope of the investigation, so it's not a fishing expedition, and that the special counsel is subject to rules and regulations of the Department of Justice. And if it's something outside that scope, he needs to come to the acting attorney general, which is him. Now, my question is, why isn't Rosenstein looking at the people that Mueller hired and saying, why are you only hiring Democratic donors, and why did you hire Hillary's attorney to be part of this investigation?
Well, I think that's exactly the right kind of question. And I noticed one of the news media this morning, which was analyzing the current situation, and they had 3 Obama Justice Department officials as their commentators. You have to think to yourself, okay, can the fix be in more than this? But see, I think this is closer to Game of Thrones than it is to anything normal. I think what you have is an outsider won the Capitol. The Capitol is now in rebellion against the outsider. The Capitol is using all of its various tools, including the news media, the Congress, and the judiciary, to try to go after this usurper, who, after all, shouldn't have won. And I think you have to put this in that kind of a context. This is a classic story of an outsider trying to reform an institution, and the institution, in this case, the deep state, doing everything it can to destroy the person who has usurped power. And I think that's the view of these people. That's why you get people like Congresswoman Waters saying she's thrilled when people break the law and leak things because it might hurt Trump. Well, if you think about it as an American, that's kind of crazy to suggest what we ought to do in order to go after a political leader is leak America's national security secrets. But it tells you the level of derangement that we're now dealing with.
Let me play on that front. Let me play Maxine Waters and what she said on Sunday about I welcome the leakers. And again, what she's referring to here is, again, this is about surveillance without a warrant against Americans, incidentally picked up, then their names unmasked, that's illegal, and then, of course, the leaking of raw intelligence, which is a violation of the Espionage Act. So she's actually advocating, in my opinion, a crime.
I am so glad they're telling us what's going on. And
we don't need to hear these conversations. They're confidential. This threatens national security.
I need to hear these conversations. I need to hear.
So you don't agree with those who say, wait a minute, this is a national security problem. We shouldn't be leaking these conversations?
Not really, because the first thing thing they need to do is start with the president. The president gave classified information to Russians in the White House, and our ally Israel was very upset with us. So start with him, number one. Number two, if the people around you are leaking in the way that they're doing, they're trying to tell us something. Of course, we don't want classified information leaked out, and I don't think they would do that with a credible president. They're doing that to this president because he has defined himself as someone who cannot be trusted, someone who's going to get this country in trouble. And so I welcome the leaks. I welcome the information. That keeps us focused on him and talking about what's wrong with him.
Wow. Doesn't that sound like advocating a crime?
And that's my point. I mean, my point to all of our listeners is you're watching a morality play. You're watching the rise of a rebel. The rebel wins when he's not supposed to. The old order is doing everything it can to destroy him. And they are justifying breaking the law. They're justifying risking our national security. They are distorting dramatically the power of the Justice Department. And again, I go back to Patrick Fitzgerald and the Bush administration. I'll just say, I don't have any confidence. I look at the destruction of Senator Stevens in Alaska. I don't have any confidence in the so-called...
And then he was proven... Wasn't he proven innocent after all that?
He was proven innocent, yes. I mean, it turned out that the document which absolutely proved he was innocent was at the top of the file, which the prosecutor had hidden from him.
You know, you actually used raw numbers that really... It actually got picked up by BizPackReview.com, because I'm agreeing with you, and you actually tweeted out this weekend that President Trump got 68.63% of the vote in West Virginia, 4.8% in Washington, D.C. Guess where Mueller has a grand jury? And then you further went on to say that Mueller is the deep state at its worst here, and you agree with Alan Dershowitz, and you said it gives the prosecutor the power to indict in the District of Columbia, which is a district that's so heavily Democratic.
Which sets the stage for a trial in the same district. It's not, I mean, look, a really good prosecutor, and there's no question Mueller is a really good prosecutor, can almost always lead a grand jury no matter where they are. But if you then try the case in an area where the defendant got 4.8% of the vote, it just strikes me as patently obvious. And when I went back and did some research and realized that Dick Cheney's chief of staff was convicted with false information from the prosecutor in a jury which had 11 Democrats and 1 Green Party member and had nobody who was a Republican, nobody who supported the Bush administration. That's not, a jury by your peers. And I was not suggesting that they should try to impanel a grand jury in West Virginia. I was drawing the contrast and suggesting that there's something almost beyond irony about the deep state agent picking the Capitol, which is deeply hostile. I mean, 19-1 hostility against the guy who now is trying to change the Capitol. And we're all supposed to think this is normal, and we're supposed to think, well, of course there wouldn't be any prejudice. Well, I mean, how can a reasonable person believe this stuff? Well,
you got out of the 16 people that he's hired, investigators and lawyers, 8 of them are Clinton, Obama, Democratic donors. There's not one Republican donor, not one. And Mueller himself, I think the number is 99.3 or 8% of his firm donated to Hillary.
It's a 99.82 actually, 0.1.
You know what he said, which really caught my... He goes, give me the person, and I'll give you the crime. Meaning that... And this goes to the old saying, I mean, the prosecutor always has an advantage before the grand jury. I will tell you this, it is... I'll ask you this when we get back. Where are the grand juries into all of these other issues where there's so much more evidence that is overwhelming and controvertible? We'll have more with Newt Gingrich in a minute. All right, as we continue, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is with us. I wanted to ask you about, and I can go through the tarmac meeting with Loretta Lynch, it's a matter, it's not an investigation, the deletion of emails, the bleach bit, acid washing of servers, and then, of course, handing the FBI phones and Blackberries without SIM cards, and then busting other ones with hammers, or Debbie Wasserman Schultz and her IT guy with government hard drives smashed into pieces, according to reports in his garage. Then it's the deputy counsel of the chief counsel of the FBI. He's under investigation for leaking. Comey's role, which we know is inappropriate, and it's Uranium One, then it's Ukraine. I mean, there's so much out there. How is it possible, with all of this wrongdoing, that there's no special counsel here?
Well, I think, how's it possible that there aren't a whole series of congressional hearings? I mean, there's so much stuff here to be subpoenaed, so much stuff to be put on the record. We've now learned, for example, that Loretta Lynch used a second email account under a false name so that when FOIA requests were put in, they weren't naming the name she was using. I mean, this kind of stuff is just blatant effort to get around the law. And I think it's astonishing that we don't have, for example, all the donation records for the Clinton Foundation. If you really want to look at foreign influence buying in the United States, there's no better venue than the Clinton Foundation. And yet, apparently, nobody has gone out, whether Justice Department or Congress, and demanded that they be turned over. So I am with you. I am absolutely puzzled both by the passivity of the Justice Department and by the passivity of the Congress at what are obviously huge zones of law breaking. The people just kind of shrug off.
Yeah, well, it seems overwhelming, the amount of evidence. And, it goes back to one other thing. It's not like the Republicans are legislating. I mean, when you took over Congress, you had a certain sense of urgency to get things done in 100 days. You kept your promise. I've never seen a bunch of people that are so incapable.
Look, you have 535 members of the House and Senate. You can do more than one thing at a time, and they could be very methodically and systematically building a case here. I mean, just to inform the country. I mean, just so we understand what happened and how did it happen. And I think to talk about Russia without understanding who donated to the Clinton Foundation is just a farce. And as an example of the degree to which it's an anti-Trump witch hunt, disguised by the elite media in their moralistic terms.
I just don't think I've seen a time like this where there are all these varying factions aligned to take down a president, and I'm not overstating it. It's absolutely true. The deep state, unprecedented leaking, Democratic Party that is just absolutely beyond any approach to work with the president, Republicans that can't get their job done, and some of them gleefully hating the president outwardly when Senate doors close, and then the media, which is so corrupt, and you add all these forces together, and who suffers? The American people.
Look, that's why I think Game of Thrones is a better introduction to where we are right now than any American government class you ever heard of.
Wow. By the way, is that your grandchildren?
No, I'm talking to you standing outside of McDonald's in Osseo, Wisconsin. I'm here with my mother-in-law.
By the way, my favorite is a quarter pounder with cheese, a fry, and a Coke. I just can't eat it a lot. I mean, I blow up like a balloon.
Well, see, you ought to be here with us having a good time.
So you're going to McDonald's right now. You getting a Big Mac or a quarter pounder with cheese?
No. I got the artisan grilled chicken.
If you're going to go to McDonald's, you might as well go for it. What would that stuff? Just total waste.
No, listen, I'm like you. If I went to McDonald's and got what I wanted every day, I wouldn't fit in the car.
Are you getting French fries at least?
No, we're splitting one small fries and that's the whole table.
I know how it works. All right, Newt Gingrich, thank you for being